who weren't moms in the mix got the label. So many of you have heard me talk about what Toy referred to, where we would send up the bat signal and Kim would jump in the car and come down, and in one particularly special day, she came down with the clothes on her back and stayed for 3 days. That's how much this change matters to Kim. But many of you may not know why this office matters so much to me. Like Julie, I started out in the state's attorney's office on the policy team, taking those tiny little wins, those little incremental changes, whether it was, in Julie's time, it was the getting services to victims. In my time, it was actually getting law enforcement to the table to start to talk about tiny little changes around drug policy, and starting to talk about contemplating all of the folks that are arrested on prostitution charges and thinking about them not as defendants, but as victims of human trafficking.
Right. Yes. That's right. Yes.
And as Julie referenced, change is the least popular word I have ever uttered in that office. And there were days when it didn't feel like we were going anywhere. And even though one of her predecessors brought me in specifically, he used to teasingly call me Jiminy Cricket. He brought me in specifically to say, why can't we do it that way? And that was revolutionary. But what I have seen Kim accomplish in these 4 years, not just the work that we've done together. I mean, legalizing cannabis with a social equity lens and expunging all those records, and Toy referenced the day in the courtroom. When we didn't go in there expecting to, I mean, we'd had all the feels already. I mean, good Lord, we'd spent the better part of the last month crying. And it was a vigil. Vigil for the victims of the war on drugs. And my sister Kim was leading that vigil. And every time, and I will never forget the first name that she spoke, forever burned into my soul. That's who this woman is. That's the mission that we should all be behind, getting her another 4 years to continue this work. I'm not going to say complete this work because it's going to take more than 4 years. Sorry, honey. And it's going to take more than just Kim Foxx. And that's what we're seeing around the country. Her election here has led to a revolution in the way people look at elected prosecutors around the country. I don't know about y'all, but I know many of us up here we lost the person we were fighting for in the presidential race.
Yeah.
Here, here.
Same, right? And for me, I'm staring down the barrel towards next Tuesday, trying to decide what I'm going to do. And I decided what I'm going to do is get this woman reelected. Anything else? And by the way, my nails look like hell. I need a touch-up. We got 6 days. My nails are going to keep looking like hell. I'll take care of it later. Our mission should be 100% laser focused on re-electing this woman. And we might have to get creative, y'all. So we're talking about calling all your friends and family. We've got this global pandemic thing going on. Remind people that they can still get a vote by mail ballot.
That's right.
It's super easy. I filled it out online today. It took me 10 seconds. You can still go early vote. There are all the ways that we can make sure that we can get this done for Kim. And so remember that as you talk to folks. People are going to be scared. People are going to be nervous. People are going to be what-ifing. Fine, let's just get it done now. That's our mission. And I now have the distinct honor and privilege of bringing up someone who really got this whole thing started. It is one of the first badass women I threw myself. I am proud to serve with you, to have worked with you all these years. Ladies and gentlemen, Cook County Board President Toni Preckwinkle.
afternoon, everybody.
Good afternoon.
I'm very grateful for that kind introduction. But the truth be told, I advised Kim against this. I don't often publicly admit that, but I told her she was running against an incumbent. That's always an uphill race, that her incumbent opposition would be well-financed, that it would take a terrible toll on her family. And fortunately for all of us, she decided to do it anyway. Fortunately for all of us. I'm very proud of the work that she's done as state's attorney. You know, we're at a time in which people are mistrustful of government. And one of the important things that she's done is try to restore faith in our criminal justice system. That's really critical. And she's done that by focusing on exonerations. She has a wrongful convictions unit that looks at our past history in Cook County and our criminal justice system. And it's pretty problematic. Police torture. Just rounding up folks and deciding that you look like the guilty party. We have a very problematic past in our criminal justice system in Cook County. And she's been willing to face that head on and to look at the Burge cases, to look at the other cases where clearly people were coerced into confessions, beaten into confessions. The wrong people went to jail. And I'm very grateful to her for that. We should all be. Because if we're going to move forward, we have to acknowledge our past mistakes. We have to acknowledge our past mistakes. I'm also proud to support her because of the way in which she's used the resources of her office. Early on, she said, you know, these low-level traffic cases, the very low-level shoplifting cases, we're not going to focus our resources on that. We're going to focus our resources on the violent acts, the shooters, the murderers, the people accused of rape, the people accused of battery. We're going to focus our resources on those crimes that do tremendous damage to our communities, not the sort of petty antisocial behavior that we focused on. And she's gotten a lot of pushback on that. And she's acknowledged that our criminal justice system disproportionately impacts black and brown people. And that our jails are full, across this country, not just in Cook County, of black and brown people. 86% of the people in our jail are black and brown. And many previously were there on low-level offenses because they couldn't afford their bond. And one of the other things that I'm very grateful to Kim for, in addition to focusing resources on the most serious crimes that involve harm to individuals and not harm to property, is her willingness to work with us on reducing reliance on cash bond. Because that's one of the things that drove our jail population and drove the disproportionate impact on minority communities, black and brown neighborhoods. And we've made tremendous progress in reducing the jail population. It's now down to less than 6,000 people a day. And when we started this work in 2010 in my office, and I think it's been about 17% since then, but over the last decade it's gone down about 40%.
That's great.
And again, these are poor people, mostly black and brown people, in jail because they couldn't pay cash bond. Not because they were the greatest danger to the society, but because they were the poorest people.
That's right.
Our jails have been poorhouses in this country. So she's been willing to acknowledge our past mistakes and do her best to rectify them. She's put the resources of her department or her office in the appropriate place, and she's worked hard with us on broader issues like cash bond. She's been a great partner in our criminal justice reform efforts. I'm proud of her work in the office under the President of the Justice Advisory Council as my Deputy Chief of Staff and my Chief of Staff, and I'm very, very proud of her work as State's Attorney of Cook County. Kim Foxx.
Thank you, Toni, and thank you to all of the women who are gathered here who have been mentors, supporters, and family to me over the course of the last 3.5 years. They talked about my record. Many of you know my record. False confession capital of the United States. We now lead the country in the vacating of wrong for the last 2 years in a row. When I came into office, it was the bloodiest year in almost 20 years, and we've seen violent crime go down while still implementing criminal justice reform efforts. We have worked diligently on prosecuting violent offenses and not getting people caught up in our criminal justice system needlessly. I've talked about my record. It's there. I want to talk about my why. Because in this room of women, it is the why. Yesterday, I spent the day thinking of my mother who passed away 8 years ago yesterday. She passed away in 2012, before there was ever even the notion of Foxx state's attorney. This was a woman who gave birth to my brother at 17, gave birth to me at 18, was a high school dropout who lived in one of the most notorious public housing complexes in the country. This was a woman who herself was a survivor of sexual assault. This was a woman who was a survivor of domestic violence. And this was a woman who was very much dedicated to her children. This was a woman who suffered from bipolar, but wasn't treated because they didn't have the resources in her community in Cabrini. This is a woman who self-medicated with marijuana on a daily basis almost until the day she died. This is a woman who told her then 6-year-old daughter, herself a survivor, that she could be a lawyer after taking her daughter and her son to child support court. And her daughter being there, seeing these women and men dressed in suits, advocating on behalf of people, said, well, who are they? And she said, they're lawyers. And I said, what do they do? She says, they're here to fight for you. So I said, I want to be a lawyer. And my mother said, without hesitation, and so it shall be. And then the judge walked in with the robe and everyone stood up, and I said, well, actually, wait a minute, who is that? And she said, that's the judge. And I said, well, actually, that's what I want to do. She said, well, you have to be a lawyer first. There were no lawyers in my family. There were no lawyers in my neighborhood. There was no opportunity for me to be fed into what that looked like. So my mother moved us from Cabrini 1 mile north to Lincoln Park. We could not afford to live in Lincoln Park. This was a woman who was on Section 8, and I remember waiting for the vouchers to come through so that I could go to LaSalle Language Academy, so that I can get an education, so that I could learn Spanish, so I understand presente. This was a woman who moved with us some 8 times between the time I was in 3rd grade until I graduated from high school, with a stint for 6 months of homelessness my junior year. This is a woman whose letter I keep on my desk in my office as the first Black woman to have achieved this role, of a letter that she wrote to my grandmother talking about her depression of not being able to provide for my brother and I, and what homelessness meant to her. That's my why. Yes. People ask me, it's been a tough year, and I've had to stand before cameras and answer questions about things that sometimes, oftentimes, frustrate me, because this job is incredibly difficult. Because every day, my lawyers walk into courtrooms and they see women like Janelle Wilson, whether she's a defendant with a marijuana case, or a victim on a domestic battery case, or someone who is there on behalf of a family member who's been a sexual assault survivor. This work is deeply, deeply personal to me. That I don't get in this spot if it wasn't for the courageousness of that woman who decided at 18 that her children could achieve the things that which she was locked out of. It is why every policy in my office makes sure that we are centering those people who have been impacted by our system. That it is not possible for me to ignore them. I know what it's like to be marginalized, forgotten about, told because you come from a certain neighborhood what you cannot do. I know what a justice system that has people choosing between whether or not to pay their rent or to pay parking tickets, and the toll that it takes when their licenses are suspended and we're putting them in jail for being poor. Or the women who sit in jails because they cannot afford their bonds, while they would go easily and pay the bond of a man, a woman will sit there longer. What it's like to be someone who has been told that you are not enough, and a justice system that punishes your not enoughness with punitiveness and separation. That I know that we shouldn't have women in our jails who are pregnant and held on no bail for violating probation for driving on suspended licenses, and that we can't simply say that this is the system we have. I know that our problems in this county are significant. And so sometimes I get a little of my mother's spirit. When I have to talk about insignificant things, when there are women and children and people in our neighborhoods who are literally dying and want to be seen in the Nell Wilson wanted to be seen. That is my why. And so if you ask me, is it worth it? The slings and arrows. A year ago I stood and there was a march in front of my office where people stood with my photo, rubbing it against their genitalia. They don't talk about that. They'll ask me a million questions, but they don't talk about the march on my office in which I was attacked using sexist, racist, and misogynistic language. They don't talk about that because I recognize there's a unicornness to me. I'm in a man's role. 79% of elected are white men. 16% are white women. If you do your math, we're down to 5%. Less than 1% are women of color. Less than 1%. And so my mere presence is disruption. My focus on the people who remind me of my mother and my brother and my cousins, and a policy agenda that is set on that, makes me disruptive. My mother would have it no other way. And so, 6 days out from a big election, and they use words like embattled state's attorney Kim Foxx. I've been embattled since April 9th, 1972 as a poor black child. Amen. This ain't new. We have a lot of work to do. To lead unapologetically, to lead authentically, to lead with a vision and a set of values that are centered among those who have the least among us. That's how you make big change. It is not accidental that I sat in Springfield with the same dress for 3 days.
I mean, it was really cute.
It was. I didn't notice that.
A dress I'll never wear again. Because I think about the fact that my mother could have been prosecuted for possessing marijuana when it was the thing that calmed her down. I did it for her. I do this work for all the women who we have seen and unseen, and particularly those who are unseen. And so, we got a lot of work to do in these next 6 days. We cannot be clouded by distraction and noise. That is the goal, is to get us to not talk about the work that needs to be done and has been done and that we will continue to do. The goal is to have us distracted by things over here. Our record is clear. Our work is unfinished. I need each and every one of you to remember your whys, why you believe that we deserve better, why you believe that our system owes the least among us a debt of servitude, why you will tell your neighbors and your friends and your Facebook groups and your text messaging groups that they have to pull their heads up. I was disappointed last week too. I voted early, and then my candidate fell off the ballot. I was heartened telling my daughters who wanted to see a woman president that this wasn't the time. But this is still our time. And so as I do this for my mother as my why, I also have 4 additional whys at home for watching me, who watched this last year, who are still on the fence about whether to vote for me. Largely because they miss their mom. And they've watched what's happened and they can't say or do anything. But you can. So, let's get up, let's show up, let's show out. Your responsibility, your vote is on behalf of those who need you and may not make it to the polls. It's on you to be their voices. It's on you to be able to be there to bring this home. This isn't a race for me. This is a race for the criminal justice system that we so deserve here in Cook County, and it has been my honor and absolute privilege to serve in this role, and I'm ready for 4 more years.
All right.
It is so refreshing to be in a group, in a room of people who feel the same way that you do. Every time I see her and get a chance to just whisper in her ear, I'm always telling her, baby, we got your back. I'm praying for you. Every single time. And let me just say this. 4 years ago, Kim Foxx came to us and said she wanted to run for office. And we said, we'll be with you. I saw Kim go around, I watched her go around to small churches, large churches, big events and small events. Her message was always the same, change, and that she was gonna make change happen. Guess what? All the accolades that you've given her this evening, everything, the good stuff that people have said about her, it's true. She has done it. She needs a chance to continue doing it, right?
Yes.
So Kim has given a lot of people, women as well as men, second chances. Kim needs a second chance. I'm going to tell her what my pastor said to me when I joined church, and it really, it fuels me every time I get to moving and say, oh, can I make it again? Can I make it again? Come as you're called, go as you're sent. And I know you will, Kim. I have no doubt about it, because that's what you've been doing. Continue to do it. Know we've got your back, we got your front.